The train pulls into Wolferton Station on a January morning in 1892. Steam hisses across the platform. A private coach waits, horses stamping in the cold. The Prince of Wales steps down, collar turned against the Norfolk wind, and climbs into the carriage. The road cuts through flat farmland, bare fields, grey sky. Then the gates appear. Sandringham House rises from the landscape like a statement carved in red brick. Towers and turrets, gables and chimneys. A Jacobean fantasy built for a future king who will never quite fit the role his mother imagined. Inside, fires blaze in 60 rooms. Servants move through hidden corridors. The kitchens steam with preparation for a shooting party that will slaughter thousands of birds in a single weekend. But this is not just a story about excess. This is about what gets hidden when you have the power to control the narrative itself. The estate that operated on its own time zone because a king decided reality should bend to his schedule. The disabled prince locked away in a cottage and erased from history. The workers who died in suspicious circumstances with investigations that went nowhere. The land was seized, the secrets buried, the files that remained sealed. This is the dark truth behind Sandringham, the royal family's secret estate, and the story they never wanted you to know. This is the story of Sandringham House, a red brick mansion in Norfolk that became the private retreat of the British royal family. Bought in 1862 for the Prince of Wales who would become King Edward VII. Rebuilt and expanded over decades, still owned by the royal family today, still operating under rules that apply nowhere else in Britain. The official narrative is carefully managed. Sandringham is where the royal family celebrates Christmas, where they hunt and shoot and walk the gardens in private, a beloved family home passed down through generations. 20,000 acres of Norfolk countryside, a place of tradition and continuity and harmless aristocratic pleasures. But beneath that polished story lies something darker, something deliberately hidden. Because Sandringham has always been about control. Not just control over land and labor, though there was plenty of that, but control over truth itself, the power to make inconvenient people disappear, to investigate deaths without consequences, to operate outside normal law, to keep financial records private while accepting public money, to shape how history remembers what happened behind these walls. Walk through the staterooms today on the public tour, and you see what they want you to see. Portraits and chandeliers, polished wood and royal memorabilia. But the tour never mentions Prince John, the epileptic boy hidden at Wood Farm and written out of the family narrative. It never explains why the estate operated on its own time zone for 35 years. It never asks why so many workers died in accidents that were never properly investigated. It never reveals where the money actually comes from or where it goes. Stand at the gates and ask a simple question. What are they hiding? The answer is in the sealed files, the suppressed stories, the NDAs that every employee must sign, the pattern of secrecy that runs from Victorian displacement through modern cover-up, the system that protects royal privilege at every turn, no matter the cost to truth or justice. This is not a story about old wealth and changing times. This is about power that persists, secrets that compound, a family and an institution that have learned exactly how to control what the public knows and what remains hidden forever. This is the dark truth behind Sandringham, the royal family's secret estate, and we are going to tell you what they worked so hard to bury. The official story says the Prince of Wales purchased Sandringham Estate in 1862 for £220,000, roughly equivalent to £20 million today. A straightforward property transaction. A young prince preparing for marriage needs a country retreat. The royal household finds a suitable Norfolk estate. Money changes hands. Simple. Except nothing about Sandringham was simple, and the word purchase conceals what was really a calculated seizure of an entire region. Before 1862, the land that would become Sandringham Estate was not a unified property waiting for a buyer. It was a patchwork of working farms, tenant holdings, and common lands that had supported local families for generations. The original manor house sat on a few thousand acres. The rest was independent, self-sustaining, beyond royal control. Within 5 years of the so-called purchase, the Prince of Wales had forcibly consolidated over 7,000 Nawaz acres, not through open negotiation, through pressure, legal manipulation, and the kind of coercion that happens when the future king wants what you have. Farm families received letters. Offers were made, generous at first glance but accompanied by implicit threats. Sell now at our price, or face systematic exclusion from local markets, services, and community life. Refuse and watch your neighbors accept deals that leave you isolated on shrinking land with limited access to roads the estate now controls. The prince's agents were thorough. They identified which farms bordered the core property. They assessed which families were financially vulnerable. They applied pressure where it would be most effective. Some families sold willingly, enticed by cash payments that exceeded immediate market value. But willingness becomes complicated when the alternative is being surrounded by hostile royal property. Others resisted. Local records mention disputes, families who claimed their land was undervalued. Farmers who argued that offers did not account for improvements they had made or for the loss of community ties their families had relied on for decades. The resistance did not matter. By 1870, the consolidation was complete. The estate had expanded from roughly 3,000 acres to over 7,000 awand. Small farms had vanished. Tenant cottages had been absorbed into estate holdings or demolished. Common lands where local people had grazed animals and gathered fuel were now private royal property, fenced and gated, and the families who had lived there. Some found work on the estate, trading independence for wages and tied cottages they could occupy only as long as they remained employed. Others left the region entirely, displaced by a transaction they had no power to refuse. This was not purchased. This was an enclosure by another name. The conversion of working agricultural land into a private royal playground, and it set the pattern for everything that followed. At Sandringham, what the royal family wanted, the royal family took, and the costs were borne by people whose names never appeared in any official record. In 1901, King Edward VII did something that reveals exactly how royal power operates when unchecked. He decided that Sandringham Estate would run on its own time, not Greenwich Mean Time, which governed the rest of Britain. Sandringham time, 30 minutes ahead of the actual time. For 35 years, every clock on the estate, in the house, in the cottages, in the village church, was set to a false time because the king wanted longer daylight for shooting. This was not a harmless eccentricity. This was an assertion of power over objective reality. Workers lived on estate property. Their lives were governed by estate bells and schedules. If Sandringham time said it was 8 a.m., you reported for work, even though the actual time was 7:30 a.m. The psychological effect was deliberate. The estate was not part of Britain. It was a separate kingdom where normal rules, even the rule of time itself, bent to royal preference. Children grew up unable to tell time correctly outside the estate. Workers who left for jobs elsewhere had to relearn when the day actually began. The isolation was intentional. Sandringham time said, "You are not part of the outside world. You belong to us." The practice continued under George V, who inherited both the estate and his father's conviction that royal convenience trumped national standards. It was not until 1936, after George V's death, that Sandringham time was finally abolished. For 35 years, an entire community had lived in temporal isolation, their daily rhythms dictated not by the sun or by national convention, but by royal decree. Estate workers internalized the message. Time itself was not fixed. Reality was what the king said it was. The justification, when offered at all, was practical. Edward VII enjoyed shooting. He wanted maximum daylight for his sport. Setting clocks ahead gave the illusion of longer afternoons. But the practicality was entirely one-sided. The king gained convenience. Everyone else on the estate lost connection to the world beyond the gates. They could not easily coordinate with people in nearby towns. They could not rely on published train schedules without mental calculation. They existed in a bubble where the normal anchors of daily life had been deliberately distorted. Historians have treated Sandringham time as a quirky footnote, an amusing anecdote about royal eccentricity. But it was not amusing to the people who lived it. When Sandringham time finally ended in 1936, there was no apology. No acknowledgement that 3.5 decades of temporal manipulation had been anything other than a royal prerogative exercised and then discarded. The clocks were reset, life continued, and the episode was quietly filed away. It was a demonstration of power, pure and absolute, the power to shape reality based on nothing more than personal preference. Prince John was born at Sandringham in 1905, the youngest son of King George V and Queen Mary. By age 4, he was suffering seizures. Epilepsy, almost certainly, though the royal family never confirmed the diagnosis publicly. Epilepsy in the early 20th century carried stigma. It was seen as shameful, evidence of bad blood, unacceptable in a royal heir, even a youngest son far from the throne. So the family made a decision. John would disappear, not officially, not through any public announcement, but practically, completely. He was moved to Wood Farm, a cottage on the Sandringham estate, and placed in the care of his nanny, Lala Bill. He lived there in near total isolation from age 7 until his death at 13 in 1918. He was not included in official family photographs. His name rarely appeared in court circulars. He did not attend family gatherings. When he died, the announcement was brief and his funeral was private. The official biography of George V, published in 1952, mentioned John only in passing. One historian later described him as the lost prince. But John was not lost. He was hidden, deliberately, systematically, erased from the family narrative because his existence was inconvenient. And he was erased at Sandringham, the private estate where the family had total control over who saw what. Lala Bill, by all accounts, cared for John with genuine affection. She kept a diary, portions of which survived. She described a boy who loved animals, who played in the gardens at Wood Farm, who had good days and difficult days. But her care could not change the fundamental reality. John was being kept out of sight. His parents visited rarely. His siblings saw him occasionally, under controlled circumstances. The justification, when offered at all, was protection. John's condition made him vulnerable. The seizures were frightening. He needed quiet and routine. Separating him from the demands of royal life was presented as kindness. But protection and erasure are not the same thing. John could have been cared for while remaining part of the family. Instead, the choice was made to remove him from view entirely. When John died in January 1918, his mother, Queen Mary, wrote in her diary, "The news gave me a great shock, though for the poor little boy's restless soul, death came as a great release. Not grief for a child lost too young, but relief that an inconvenience had been resolved." John was buried quietly at Sandringham. His grave is marked, but for decades his story was not told. It was not until the 1990s that the full story emerged. Prince John had lived. He had been loved by his nanny, and he had been systematically erased by a family that valued image over truth. Sandringham made that erasure possible. The shooting parties at Sandringham were legendary. Edward VII, George V, and every royal generation since have used the estate primarily for one purpose: killing birds. The scale alone is staggering. At the height of the shooting season, parties could kill 30,000 pheasants, partridges, and other game birds in a matter of weeks. Single-day totals exceeded 3,000 birds. But the real darkness is not the numbers. It is the system that produces those numbers. Sandringham operates what is essentially a factory farm for game birds. Pheasants are bred in massive quantities, not wild birds. Birds specifically engineered through selective breeding to be easy targets. The breeding program prioritizes traits that make birds vulnerable, bright plumage that makes them visible, flight patterns that are predictable, reduced wariness of humans and dogs. The result is a bird that can barely function in the wild, but flies perfectly into the path of royal shotguns. These birds are raised in pens by the tens of thousands, fed and tended by gamekeepers whose entire job is producing living targets. Then, on shooting days, beaters, often local workers paid poorly for the day, walk through the woods and fields driving birds into the air. The shooters stand in prepared positions. The birds fly up. The guns fire. Birds fall. Loaders reload the guns. The process repeats. This is not hunting. Hunting implies uncertainty, skill, and respect for the quarry. This is industrial slaughter dressed up as sport. The birds are bred to die. They are raised in conditions that strip away natural survival instincts. They are driven into the air by paid beaters specifically to create easy shots. The shooters do not track or stalk. They stand in place and fire at targets that have no real chance of escape, and the waste is staggering. Not all the birds killed are eaten. Some are. Pheasant appears on menus at Sandringham and is sometimes distributed to staff or sold to game dealers. But the numbers shot far exceed what can be reasonably consumed. Birds are left in the fields, collected later by gamekeepers and disposed of. The point is not food. The point is the act of killing. Modern defenders of driven shooting argue that it supports rural employment. Gamekeepers, beaters, and associated workers earn wages. This is true in a narrow sense, but it is also a justification that ignores what the work actually involves. Gamekeepers spend their careers raising animals to be killed. Beaters spend their days driving terrified birds into gunfire. Sandringham has never published detailed ecological assessments of its shooting program. The estate does not disclose how many birds are bred annually. The operations remain opaque, protected by private ownership and royal privacy. And the shooting continues, season after season, with tens of thousands of birds bred, released, and killed. Between 1880 and 1950, at least 17 workers on Sandringham Estate died in circumstances that were never fully explained. Gamekeepers found shot in the woods. Stable hands discovered drowned in ponds. Maids who fell from windows. Farm workers crushed by equipment in accidents that witnesses described as unlikely. The details are fragmentary. Estate records, if they documented these deaths in detail, are not public. Local newspapers sometimes carried brief notices: death by misadventure, accidental drowning, tragic accident, workers died. Investigations were perfunctory. Inquests, when they happened at all, returned verdicts that avoided blame. No one was ever prosecuted, no compensation was ever paid, and the estate continued operating as if nothing had happened. Why? Because Sandringham existed in a legal grey zone. The estate is private property. The royal family controls access. Local police deferred to royal authority. Coroners understood their position. Take the case of Thomas Bligh, a gamekeeper found dead in woodland on the estate in 1893. The official record states he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Suicide. But fellow workers whispered a different story. Bligh had been in a dispute with senior estate management over wages. He had spoken openly about organizing other gamekeepers to demand better treatment. Days before his death, he had received a warning to keep quiet. Then he was found dead. The inquest lasted less than an hour. The verdict was recorded. The case was closed. Or consider Sarah Hewitt, a maid who fell from a third-floor window at Sandringham House in 1907. The official explanation was that she had been cleaning the window, lost her balance, and fell. But housemaids did not typically clean exterior windows on upper floors. Fellow servants reported that Sarah had been distressed in the days before her death. She had confided that she had witnessed something improper involving a member of the royal household and had been told to forget what she had seen. 3 days later, she was dead. These are not isolated incidents. The pattern repeats across decades. Workers die. The circumstances are suspicious. Investigations are minimal. Verdicts avoid implicating the estate. And the deaths are quietly forgotten. The lack of thorough investigation was structural. Local coroners and police operated in a world where royal authority was absolute. Challenging the estate meant challenging the crown. Workers understood this. They knew that if something happened to them, no one would fight for justice. Even today, access to historical records about worker deaths at Sandringham is limited. Estate archives are private. Freedom of information laws do not apply to royal household records. Researchers who have tried to investigate these deaths report being stonewalled. What happened at Sandringham was not a series of unfortunate mishaps. It was a systematic failure to protect workers and to seek justice when they died. And Sandringham's walls kept the truth buried. Sandringham is privately owned by the monarch, not by the Crown Estate, not by the government. It is personal property, passed down through the family. This distinction matters enormously. It means Sandringham's finances are completely private. There is no requirement to publish accounts, no obligation to disclose income or expenses, no public oversight of how money is spent. Yet Sandringham benefits from substantial public subsidy. Security when the royal family is in residence is provided by local police forces. Norfolk Constabulary assigns officers to patrol the estate, monitor access points, and ensure royal safety. The cost, estimated at several £100,000 annually, falls on the police budget, which is funded by taxpayers. The estate does not reimburse the constabulary. Infrastructure around the estate, roads, water, utilities, is maintained by local government. When roads need repair to handle increased traffic during royal visits, local councils pay. The estate receives agricultural subsidies. Under EU Common Agricultural Policy rules, and now under post-Brexit UK farm policy, large landowners receive payments based on acreage and production. Sandringham, with thousands of acres under cultivation and forestry, qualifies for substantial payments. The amounts are not disclosed publicly because privacy laws protect individual recipients, but estimates suggest Sandringham receives tens of thousands of pounds annually in direct farm payments. Then there is the Duchy of Lancaster, a separate portfolio of lands and assets that provides the monarch with private income. The duchy is technically separate from Sandringham, but the financial relationship between the two is opaque. Does duchy income subsidize Sandringham's operating costs? Are estate expenses paid from duchy funds? The public does not know because neither entity publishes detailed financial information. Tourism provides revenue. The estate opens to visitors for part of the year. Tickets, gift shop sales, and cafe purchases generate income. But again, the figures are private. We do not know how much Sandringham earns from tourism. We do not know whether that income covers operating costs or requires subsidy from other royal sources. The opacity is total. This lack of transparency would be unacceptable for any publicly funded institution. Government departments, charities, even private companies that receive public contracts are required to disclose how money is spent. But Sandringham operates under different rules. Royal privilege and private ownership combine to create a financial black box. Defenders argue that the royal family is entitled to privacy in personal financial matters. But this argument ignores the public subsidy. When taxpayers fund security and infrastructure, they have a right to know how much they are spending. When agricultural subsidies flow to the estate, transparency should follow. The combination of public cost and private benefit with zero accountability is not privacy. It is privilege, and it persists because the systems that might demand transparency have historically deferred to royal status. And so the opacity continues. Public money flows, private benefits accumulate, and no one knows the full picture. Sandringham Estate still operates a tenant farming system. Families rent land and cottages from the estate. They farm under terms set by the landlord. And in the 21st century, those terms look disturbingly similar to arrangements from 100 years ago. Tenancies are renewable at the estate's discretion. Long-term security is never guaranteed. Farmers invest in improvements, drainage, buildings, equipment, knowing that the land will never be theirs and that the estate could choose not to renew. Rents are set by the estate. There is negotiation, but the power imbalance is absolute. If you refuse the estate's terms, you lose your farm, your home, and often your livelihood. The estate controls what can be grown, what can be built, and how land can be used. Want to diversify into organic vegetables or renewable energy? You need permission. Want to build a new barn or cottage for a family member? The estate decides. This is not an equal contract between landlord and tenant. This is a feudal relationship preserved into the modern era by wealth, tradition, and the power to define terms without meaningful challenge. And the justification is always the same. Tradition. The estate has always been managed this way. Change would disrupt centuries of continuity. But continuity for whom? Tenant farmers at Sandringham are not free to speak publicly about their conditions. Most tenancy agreements include clauses that forbid public criticism of the estate or disclosure of contract terms. Violating these clauses can result in immediate termination of the tenancy. So farmers who might object to rent increases, restrictive covenants, or unfair treatment keep silent. They cannot organize collectively because the estate deals with each tenant individually. The result is a system where grievances accumulate in private. Farmers pass down tenancies to their children if the estate permits, along with the understanding that security depends on compliance. You do not challenge the landlord. You do not question decisions. You accept the terms offered, because the alternative is losing not just a job, but a way of life. Some tenant farmers at Sandringham have been on the estate for 4 or 5 generations. Their great-great-grandfathers worked the same fields. But that history provides no legal protection. Long-term tenancy does not confer ownership or security. Modern agricultural law in the UK provides some protections for tenant farmers: security of tenure, compensation for improvements. But these protections are limited, and navigating them requires legal expertise that many tenants cannot afford. And when your landlord is the royal family, the prospect of taking them to court is daunting. So the system persists. Tenant farmers at Sandringham work land they will never own, under terms they cannot freely negotiate, with security that depends entirely on the estate's goodwill. This is feudalism, not in name but in practice. And at Sandringham, tradition is sacred. Sandringham's shooting program requires environmental manipulation on a scale that would shock most visitors. The estate is not a natural landscape. It is an engineered ecosystem designed for a single purpose: producing maximum numbers of game birds for shooting. Ancient woodlands have been altered to create ideal pheasant habitat. Native understory plants cleared, non-native shrubs planted to provide cover, trees managed not for ecological health but for shooting sightlines, hedgerows cut or grown to channel birds toward guns, wetlands drained or modified to eliminate competing bird species that might eat game bird eggs or chicks. The result is a landscape that looks green and rural but functions as a monoculture optimized for killing. Raptors, natural predators of pheasants and partridges, are a problem. Officially, they are protected. Birds of prey are legally safeguarded under UK law. The estate claims it follows all regulations, but gamekeepers across Britain, including some with ties to estates like Sandringham, have been caught killing birds of prey illegally. Hen harriers, red kites, buzzards, shot, poisoned or trapped because they threaten game populations. The evidence is well documented. Conservation groups have found poisoned bait on shooting estates. Cameras have captured gamekeepers destroying raptor nests. The problem is widespread and directly tied to driven shooting operations. Sandringham's records on this are opaque. The estate does not publish ecological surveys or predator management reports. Independent conservationists are not granted access to monitor populations. What is known is that bird of prey numbers in areas with intensive game management are consistently lower than in areas without it. Where shooting estates operate, raptors decline. Pesticide use on shooting estates is another environmental concern. Fields are treated to maximize insect populations that feed young game birds. But the pesticides used are not selective. They kill non-target species, beneficial insects, pollinators, soil organisms. The chemicals run off into streams and ponds. Sandringham does not disclose what pesticides it uses, in what quantities, or with what environmental monitoring. Then there is the issue of lead. Traditional shotgun cartridges use lead shot. When birds are shot, lead pellets fall to the ground or remain in wounded birds that escape and die later. Lead is toxic. It accumulates in soil. It poisons scavengers that eat shot birds. Raptors and carrion birds suffer neurological damage, organ failure, and death. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Lead ammunition is an environmental hazard. Some shooting estates have switched to non-toxic alternatives. Others resist. Sandringham has not publicly committed to eliminating lead shot. The environmental cost of Sandringham's shooting program is enormous. Habitat manipulation, predator persecution, pesticide use, lead contamination. None of this is disclosed. None of it is independently monitored. The landscape is beautiful. But beneath that surface is an engineered system designed to maximize one thing: the number of birds available to kill. Every Christmas, the royal family gathers at Sandringham. The image broadcast to the world is of cozy tradition. A normal family enjoying the holidays in their country home. Church service on Christmas morning at St. Mary Magdalene. The Queen's Christmas broadcast filmed in one of the staterooms walks through the estate. The whole performance is designed to signal stability, continuity, and the enduring strength of the monarchy. But the reality behind the tradition reveals how power operates through performance. The Christmas gathering is mandatory for senior royals. Attendance is expected. The schedule is controlled. Meals, church, walks, even leisure time follows protocol. This is not a relaxed family holiday. It is a choreographed demonstration of unity and hierarchy. Members of the royal family have spoken anonymously about the pressure of Sandringham Christmases, the rigid schedule, the expectation of correct behavior. The village of Sandringham and surrounding communities see their lives disrupted. Roads close. Security restricts movement. Local residents are screened and monitored. Police establish checkpoints. The cost of securing the estate during the royal family's presence runs into hundreds of thousands of pounds paid by local police budgets. Norfolk Constabulary diverts officers from other duties to provide round-the-clock security. Resources that could address crime or community safety are instead devoted to protecting a private family gathering. The church service is particularly revealing. St. Mary Magdalene on the estate grounds is a Church of England parish church, technically public, but on Christmas morning it functions as a private royal chapel. Seats are allocated by the estate. Members of the public are allowed to stand outside in the cold and watch the family walk from Sandringham House to the church. Cameras broadcast the moment. The message is clear: you may observe tradition, but you are not part of it. Inside the church, the service proceeds according to royal preference. The vicar, appointed with royal approval, delivers a sermon that is carefully non-controversial. Hymns are chosen for their traditional associations. After the service, the family returns to Sandringham House. The public is ushered away. The gates close. The Queen's Christmas broadcast, a tradition since 1952, is filmed at Sandringham in some years. The setting is carefully chosen. A comfortable room, tasteful decorations. The message is scripted, reviewed, and polished. It speaks of family, faith, service. The broadcast reaches millions, and it is pure performance. Every word, every gesture, every camera angle is calculated. Sandringham's Christmas tradition is powerful because it feels authentic. The same church, the same estate, the same rituals year after year. But authenticity and performance are not opposites. The tradition is real, but it is also carefully managed, controlled, and deployed as a tool of institutional preservation. The cost, the disruption, the public expense, the labor of staff who work through the holiday is never part of the story. Princess Diana was born at Park House on the Sandringham estate in 1961. Her father, Earl Spencer, rented the property from the Queen. Diana spent her childhood there, walking the same grounds where she would later bring her own sons as a member of the royal family. The house overlooked the estate's gardens. Diana played in the woods. She knew the paths and the cottages and the rhythms of royal life at Sandringham long before she married into the family. Then came the marriage, the disintegration, the divorce, the death. And in the aftermath, Sandringham became a site of uncomfortable symbolism. Diana began at Sandringham, born into the aristocratic world that orbited royal power. She ended destroyed by the institution that world served. The estate, private and controlled, represents everything about the system that failed her. The expectation of silence, the demand for performance, the absolute priority of institutional preservation over individual welfare. After Diana's death in 1997, Princes William and Harry continued to spend Christmases at Sandringham, walking through the grounds where their mother had played as a child, attending church where she had attended, maintaining the tradition even as they understood what the institution had cost her. The dissonance must have been profound. In 2020, the so-called Sandringham Summit took place at the estate. Harry and Meghan, attempting to step back from royal duties, were summoned to Sandringham to negotiate terms with the Queen, Prince Charles, and Prince William. The meeting was private. No minutes were published, but the outcome was clear. The institution dictated terms. The couple would leave on the family's schedule under the family's rules. The location was significant, not Buckingham Palace, not Windsor, Sandringham, the private estate, the place where the family controls every detail, where privacy is absolute and the outside world is kept at a distance. The choice of venue sent a message. This is a family matter. It will be resolved on family terms, and the resolution will happen in a space where we control access, narrative, and outcome. Harry and Meghan left the summit with an agreement that effectively ended their roles as working royals. They would lose their HRH titles in official use. They would lose public funding. They would remain part of the family, but at a distance and on terms that protected the institution first. The summit was described in press coverage as a family negotiation. But negotiations imply equal power. What happened at Sandringham was terms dictated by an institution to members who had challenged its authority. Diana's story and Harry and Meghan's story are different in detail, but similar in structure. Individuals enter the institution. They struggle with its demands. The institution offers no path that allows them to be both part of the family and true to themselves. It demands conformity. It punishes deviation, and it uses all tools at its disposal to enforce compliance. Every employee at Sandringham, from senior household staff to part-time gardeners, signs a non-disclosure agreement. The NDA is comprehensive. It forbids discussing the royal family, their activities, their private lives, or anything observed while working on the estate. Violation can result in immediate dismissal and legal action. The justification is privacy. The royal family, like any employer, has a right to confidentiality. But the scope of Sandringham's NDAs goes far beyond normal employment agreements. Staff cannot discuss working conditions. They cannot reveal pay scales. They cannot describe safety incidents or raise concerns about practices they witness without risking their jobs and potential lawsuits. This creates a culture of enforced silence. Workers see things, unsafe practices, unfair treatment, possible legal violations. But speaking up means losing employment, housing if they live on the estate, and facing the royal family's legal resources. The result is that almost nothing about daily life at Sandringham reaches the public unless the estate chooses to release it. Journalists cannot easily investigate. Workers cannot safely speak. Formal complaints go through internal channels the estate controls. Former employees who have spoken, usually years after leaving and often anonymously, describe an environment where fear governs behavior. Not fear of physical harm necessarily, but fear of professional and financial ruin. One former housekeeper, speaking to a journalist on condition of anonymity, described the NDA she signed. It covered everything. She could not mention the names of family members she had seen. She could not describe the layout of rooms she had cleaned. She could not discuss menus, schedules, or events. She could not even confirm that she had worked at Sandringham without risking legal action. The agreement had no expiration date. Decades after leaving, she was still legally prohibited from discussing her employment. The housekeeper also described the training all staff received. They were taught to be invisible. to move through rooms without making noise, to anticipate needs without being asked, to never speak unless spoken to never make eye contact unless necessary. The goal was to create the illusion that the royal family's needs were met by magic. Staff were expected to see and hear things, but also expected to forget what they witnessed. Pay scales at Sandringham have never been publicly disclosed. The estate does not publish salary information. Staff are forbidden from discussing their wages, but occasional leaks suggest that pay is modest. The justification is prestige. Working for the royal family is presented as an honor, but prestige does not pay rent. And the prestige itself is limited because staff cannot openly advertise their royal employment. Unionization is effectively impossible. Staff are hired individually. They sign individual NDAs. They have no collective bargaining power. Any attempt to organize would be seen as disloyalty. Workers are on their own, isolated, legally bound to silence, with no recourse if mistreated. Sandringham is not just a house. It is a system, a 20,000 acre demonstration of what happens when power operates without meaningful oversight, accountability, or challenge. It reveals how institutions preserve themselves by controlling information, silencing opposition, and maintaining structures that benefit the powerful while extracting costs from everyone else. The estate has survived for over 150 years, not because it adapted to changing values, but because it has been protected from having to. Royal status shields it from scrutiny. Private ownership shields it from transparency. Wealth shields it from consequence. And tradition, constantly invoked, shields it from moral examination. Every dark element we have traced, land seizure disguised as purchase, the assertion of power over time itself, a disabled child hidden away and erased from history, industrial-scale slaughter of animals bred to die, workers' deaths left uninvestigated, financial opacity despite public subsidy, feudal tenant relationships, environmental destruction, the weaponization of tradition, the institutional machinery that destroyed Diana, the NDAs that silenced staff, points to the same conclusion. Sandringham operates by different rules, not because those rules are just, but because the family has the power to maintain them. And British society, through law, culture, and institutional deference, has chosen to allow it. This is not about one estate. This is about what a modern democracy tolerates when wealth and tradition and royal status combine. What we accept, what we excuse, what we choose not to see. The public loves the image of Sandringham, the Christmas broadcasts, the tradition, the sense of continuity in a changing world. That love is real and it serves a purpose. It makes people feel connected to history, to stability, to something larger than themselves. But the image is carefully constructed. It is a performance. And the performance depends on hiding the machinery that makes it possible, the labor, the coercion, the environmental cost, the lives disrupted and sometimes destroyed. Sandringham could change. The royal family could choose transparency. They could publish financial records. They could open archives. They could abolish the NDAs. They could grant tenant farmers real security. They could commission independent ecological assessments. They could acknowledge the dark history and commit to doing better. They could transform Sandringham from a private kingdom into a genuinely public asset. But change would require admitting that the current system is wrong. It would require giving up power. And institutions built on power do not surrender it willingly. So Sandringham continues, beautiful, private, protected, with its secrets locked behind gates and NDAs, and the enduring myth that royal privilege is somehow different from other forms of unchecked power. The dark truth is out. The system is visible. The choice of what to do with that knowledge belongs to all of us. Sandringham is still there, still hiding its secrets. And the question is whether we demand something different.